in the 25th century.
Exploring tomorrow.
The Amazing Adventures of Flash Gordon.
Space Patrol!
Rocket into the future with On Orbit. Space Cadet.
2001.
Countdown for blast off. X-5, 4, 3, 2, X-1, fire.
It was the early 1930s, and more than 15 million Americans, fully 1/4 of all wage-earning workers, were unemployed. It was during the Depression, and most people did not have much money to spare. But most people had a radio, and listening to the radio was free. The most popular broadcasts were those that distracted listeners from their everyday struggles. Comedy programs like Amos and Andy were the rage of the day, and comedians from vaudeville were flocking to radio to entertain the nation, and they quickly became stars of the new medium. Serial dramas, sporting events, and music programs were also very popular. Science fiction was coming into its own at the beginning of the 20th century and became popular in other media. Many short stories by science fiction writers were commonly included in regular adventure and pulp magazines. In 1926, Hugo Gernsback founded the first American magazine dedicated exclusively to the emerging genre of science fiction, called Amazing Stories. The magazine introduced new authors and serials to the public, as well as featured stories by well-known science fiction writers, such as H.G. Wells, Jules Verne, and Edgar Allan Poe. However, radio was not quick to jump on the science fiction bandwagon, and by and large ignored the genre. The first science fiction radio shows offered by radio were intended for juveniles, and were lifted from the comic strip page of the daily newspaper. These shows for children tended to glamorize scientific progress and feature larger-than-life heroes.
Then here we go, 500 years into the future.
CBS Radio began airing one such program on November 7, 1932. The series, Buck Rogers in the 25th Century, was based on the popular novel and comic series, and notable for being the first science fiction radio show.
Buck Rogers is on the air. Now, do you remember our last episode? We learned that Killer Kane and Ardela, with Barney as their prisoner, had landed at the ruins of ancient Philadelphia.
It was initially a 15-minute program, broadcast 4 times a week, Monday through Thursday at 7:15 p.m. New York time. The hero's origin was developed in the comic strips and related again for radio audiences. Buck was just 20 years old at the time of the Great War, when strange gases rendered him unconscious in an old abandoned mine. These same gases preserved him in suspended animation until he awoke one day, 500 years later, to a strange world of the future. Buck Rogers' exploits would entertain radio listeners for 3.5 years, until May of 1936, when the series left the airwaves. On the heels of the popular 1939 movie serial starring Buster Crabbe, the Mutual Broadcasting System would return Buck Rogers to the radio airwaves for almost 4 months in April of the same year.
Presenting for the first time in radio the amazing interplanetary adventures of Flash Gordon and Dale Arden.
Flash Gordon began as the hero of a science fiction comic strip originally drawn by Alex Raymond, which was first published on January 7, 1934. The strip, created to compete with the already established Buck Rogers Adventure strip, has since surpassed Buck Rogers for longevity. Starting April 22, 1935, the strip was adapted into The Amazing Interplanetary Adventures of Flash Gordon, a 26-episode weekly radio serial. The series followed the strip very closely, amounting to a week-by-week adaptation of the Sunday strip from most of its run. The radio series broke with the strip continuity in the last 2 episodes, when Flash, Dale, and Zarkov return to Earth. They make a crash landing in Africa, where they meet Jungle Jim, the star of another of Alex Raymond's comic strips. The series ended on October 26, 1935, with Flash and Dale's marriage. The next week, the adventures of Jungle Jim picked up in the Flash Gordon Saturday time slot. However, 2 days later, on October 28th, the Further Interplanetary Adventures of Flash Gordon debuted as a daily show, running 5 days a week. This series strayed farther afield from Raymond's strip, involving Flash, Dale, and Zarkov in an adventure in Atlantis. The series aired 74 episodes, ending on February 6, 1936. Radio was slow to produce a series dedicated to serious adult science fiction. Instead, there were some occasional attempts at science fiction on various anthology radio series over the years.
No, it can't be. It can't. This is a meteor. It came from out there. There is no flesh. Nothing could live.
Russ, look.
Huh?
It's growing.
Growing?
We escape to the year 100,080, and to a world where beauty and terror live side by side, as H.G. Wells described it in his immortal story, The Time Machine.
Those creatures know what that means, what anything means. Wait a minute, something's happening. A humped shape is rising out of the pit. I can make out a small beam of light against a mirror. What's that? There's a jet of flame springing from the mirror and it leaps right at the advancing men. It strikes them head on. Lord, they're turning into flames. Oh, the whole field's caught up by the woods, the barns, the gas tanks of the automobiles spreading everywhere. It's coming this way now, about 20 yards to my right.
The Radio Guild presents The Man Who Was Tomorrow, an original radio play by Ranald R. MacDougall.
Ready, Stella?
Yes.
To the E.B. Hyson Agency, New York, USA. We beg to acknowledge receipt of order for 5,000 robots. As you are sending your own vessel, please dispatch as cargo equal quantities of soft and hot coal for RUR, the same to be credited as part payment of the amount due to us. We beg to remain for Rossum's Universal Robots. Yours truly, Harry Duman.
This is Ronald Coleman, inviting you to radio's most dramatic half-hour, Favorite Story. Our Favorite Story series transports you by the wonder of radio to mountain tops in Tibet, drawing rooms of Queen Victoria's London, and even to the moon. Well, this week we travel into the depths of the oceans of the world to bring you Jules Verne's most imaginative adventure, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
It was not until the 1950s that science fiction radio really hit its stride, even as science fiction was beginning to appear on television as well. New radio series were introduced which offered a variety of exciting tales of future technology, with a special focus on space exploration, including alien invasion, and often reflected contemporary anxieties about the dangers of technology.
Are you afraid to face tomorrow, or whatever may lie beyond tomorrow? Do you think you're up to spending a weekend on the moon, or entertaining house guests from Mars? Beyond tomorrow.
Some argue that Beyond Tomorrow, written by Robert Heinlein, was the first science fiction show aimed for adults, with the first episode airing on February 23, 1950. However, because Beyond Tomorrow was dropped after only 3 episodes, the credit for the first adult science fiction series is often given to 2000 Plus. 2000 Plus first aired to radio audiences on March 15, 1950. The shows were written in-house from original material rather than from science fiction authors or classic stories, Many episodes revolved around the follies of space travel, science, and technology.
Adventures in time and space, told in future tense.
Dimension X.
Dimension X hit the airwaves 1 month later. With the blessing of the majority of the science fiction community, Dimension X featured writings of the leading science fiction writers of the time, including Isaac Asimov, Robert Bloch, Ray Bradbury, Robert Heinlein, Clifford D. Simak, and even Kurt Vonnegut. Hosted by Norman Rose, Dimension X used content and believability to explore the world of tomorrow. The sound effects were fantastic, creating aliens, galaxies, weapons, inventions, robots, and more in the imaginations of radio listeners across the nation. Although science fiction had expanded into adult fiction, the wonder of science fiction didn't leave the juvenile market. Science fiction radio shows continued to appear to delight younger audiences. In the early 1950s, Space Patrol, a popular television phenomenon, was adapted for radio. On the series, our hero was Buzz Corey, Commander-in-Chief of the Space Patrol. The nemesis of the Space Patrol were space bad guys, evil geniuses, and alien warlords, such as the Black Falcon and the beautiful but evil Tonga. Tom Corbett's Space Cadet was another science fiction television show which was brought to radio 2 years later. And like Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon, Tom Corbett's Space Cadet began as a comic strip. Tom Corbett piloted the spaceship Polaris, whose crew includes scientist Roger Manning, Jan Merlin, Astro, the alien from Venus, Dr. Joan Dale, and Captain Strong. Like Dimension X, Tom Corbett's Space Cadet was a smart, well-produced show which used fantastic sound effects. The 1950s were not over yet, and many science fiction enthusiasts considered 1950 to 1960 to be the golden era of science fiction. This is the decade when the best science fiction radio shows were created. Exploring Tomorrow was created toward the end of the 1950s decade. Acclaimed editor of Astounding Magazine, John Campbell, produced and hosted Exploring Tomorrow with the aid of some of his best contributing writers. With Campbell at the reins, Exploring Tomorrow was a well-constructed show with elevated concepts and great stories. Campbell's introductions are thoughtful and provocative. X-1, 1955 to 1958, was considered to be the revival of Dimension X, and is often considered to be the greatest of not only science fiction radio dramas, but of all radio dramas. Like Dimension X, X-1 used some of the leading science fiction authors in the genre. The show's scriptwriters, Ernest Kenoy and George Lefferts, made some remarkable original scripts. Lefferts' The Parade features a Martian who hires an advertising agency to help him plan a parade to celebrate the Martian invasion. Some shows ended unhappily, such as The Cold Equation, and an adaptation of Ray Bradbury's Mars in Heaven, where Earthmen land on Mars to discover it's inhabited by people they know. Remarkably, all episodes of X-1 survived.